Today I'm going to do a response video. Protaku82 had a pretty interesting video on, it's entitled My History as a Gamer, and that's actually, I think, a pretty good idea. It's his personal history as a gamer, and he invites anybody to post a video response. So I'll post a link in the description to his video and a link to his channel, and definitely check out his channel and check out his video. I reckon my history of gaming would have started late 70s. My brother got one, probably spent $20 or $30 for it, for a Pong clone, Pong style game. It had 5 or 6 different Pong style games, just slight variations, all of them 2-player, of course. And so that would have been my first experience. And then the second time would also have been courtesy of my brother. Right about 1980, he bought an Ohio Scientific and OSI computer. It was 4K, had a tape interface, tape storage, and he had a Space Invaders clone. The first really arcade, after Pong, the first really single-player arcade game that I'd ever played was the Space Invaders on that machine, and the graphics were somewhat crude, and I was immediately hooked. I was video games is something I want to play, and I played every time he gave me a chance. And then about that time, I was I would play in the arcade. About that time, the arcade came out, and I would play Scramble, Donkey Kong, Joust, Berserk, and also about that time, my cousin got an Atari 2600, and so when we went over to her house, we played Missile Command and Jungle Hunt, and later on Pole Position. And then my brother saw an ad, and he mentioned that Radio Shack had the color computer. Well, I didn't know a whole lot about it. I figured, well, you get a computer, you play games, what the heck. So I went in and got a 16K extended basic machine in April of 1982, paid $599 for it. Got a tape drive and a set of the old original black analog non-self-centering joysticks with the power buttons that, if you were rough on them like I did, didn't hold up all that well. Got it home, turned it on, and now what do I do with it? Didn't have any games for it, and I even, I looked for Radio Shack. I think they had Super Bust Out, and they had Dino Wars, but they didn't really have any of the popular arcade games available. And finally, I found out that Charlottesville had some games, which was a couple hours away, and so I decided I was going to get those games, and I had a motorcycle at the time, so I took a couple-hour ride up to Charlottesville, and I picked up Space Assault, which is Space Invaders clone, and Polaris, which is a Missile Command clone. Came back, 4-hour trip, but it was a lot of fun riding on a motorcycle, so I certainly didn't mind the trip. And had 2 games and played the heck out of them. And over 82, towards the, as it went on in 82, more of the games became available in the store. But the one thing that I really wanted was a Pac-Man game, and they didn't have it. I think in 82 they'd already brought out Megabug, but when it came out, it was a nice game, but it wasn't Pac-Man. It was a different game. And I found out, all I knew was, I figured Radio Shack, if you wanted games for Radio Shack computer, you went to Radio Shack. But the one local store manager had told me that he knew that somebody had written a Pac-Man game. He didn't know who, didn't know where to get anything, but he just knew that somebody had written a Pac-Man game. And so in the fall, towards the end of the fall of 82, Radio Shack used to have a TRS-80 microcomputer newsletter. I think that was the title of it. That covered all things Radio Shack, all computers Radio Shack. And they mentioned in their Rainbow magazine that specialized in the color computer. And I thought, well, they've got to have ads. Maybe this guy that has a Pac-Man game, maybe he advertises in Rainbow. So I thought, maybe I can find 1 or 2 games. So I subscribed to it. And I got the December of 82 issue. It was my first issue. And when it came, I opened it up, and I literally spent an hour just looking at the ads. And yes, there was several different Pac-Man versions, and Donkey Kong and all other kinds. And at the time, I played Centipede a lot at the local arcade. So I went ahead and got Colorpede, a Centipede clone, and then over the years I got a lot of other games through Rainbow. And then I went on through in '86. As soon as the Color Computer 3 came out, I got it. And for a fact, I got the first one that was available locally, and got different Color Computer 3 games that really were. The Color Computer 3 had higher resolution and way more colors, and was just a much better game machine. Then in 1989, I got my first PC. Still at this time, you notice I've never mentioned me owning a console, because I was always a computer gamer. In the 80s, you used the same joysticks as you did on consoles. Controls were largely the same as the early generation of consoles. They both had arcade games, so the games were largely the same. So if you got a computer, you had the same gaming experience, plus you had a computer. So in '89, I got my first PC. Originally it was a monochrome monitor, and then I went ahead and got VGA for it fairly quickly, and got a different shareware games. And most of the games shareware commercial at that time, instead of like today where they ran on the latest and greatest hardware, and you had to upgrade the hardware to be able to play the current generation of games. They basically tried to run on all available hardware. So even though you had a nice VGA monitor, most games were running on CGA with just 4 colors. And the first game that I remember that really took advantage of the graphics that I owned was Commander Keen by id Software, when they were still as shareware producers. And I got all of the Commander Keen games at the time, and that was, I didn't go a whole lot beyond that. I never quite got into getting the latest and greatest games for it. I did get Tomb Raider, I think about the time that Tomb Raider 3 was out. And really after Tomb Raider, I didn't get a lot of new games other than the games that came with each new version of Windows. I've got a few things like Microsoft Return of Arcade and their Best of Entertainment pack, retro games and some puzzle games and things like that. But I didn't get a lot of, I didn't really keep up as a PC gamer other than, like I say, just to play what I already had and a few of those type games. And then in '09, last year, just about a year ago, in fact, I got broadband and got on YouTube. And started to, saw some of the videos for retro gaming and some of the old color. First things I saw was the old Color Computer commercials. I found a few of those because I'd never really didn't ever remember seeing any Color Computer commercials on TV. So I got a couple of those commercials, and that inspired me to get my Color Computer 3 out of storage and get it running again. And then I started to get into some retro gaming videos, and the next thing you know, I'd gotten myself a Commodore VIC-20, and then I got a Mega Cart for it, so I could run, most of the popular games for it. And then I got me a Atari 2600, which last year I got Atari 2600, the first console that I ever owned, and had 30-some games for it. And I got then I followed that up with NES, with the original Nintendo, and followed that up with the Sega Master System. And then just very recently I got a Nintendo 64. And what's next? Well, let me give you a little tease as to what's next. Just a little tease as to what's coming next. So this is my history of gaming, and be sure and check out Protaku 82's video, and certainly post your own history as a response to him. And if you got any comments on this history of mine, leave me a comment, and more later.